Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to all of the paying members of my Patreon channel. Your support is needed, and without you, none of this is possible. I also want to give a special shout out to Daddy Dame for the $20 donation.
My man.
And if you'd like to support the channel directly, Cash App and PayPal are available. Just be sure to let me know in the For section if it's okay for me to thank you publicly, or else I'll assume you'll want to remain anonymous.
And here we go.
Layman's Journal, Chapter 248. If you've been following my content for any length of time, you'd know I'm not a fan of the brick-and-mortar church, the modern brick-and-mortar church, that I believe its focus has nothing to do with God, but rather the bitter delusions of chronically single middle-aged women. I also believe it's a cesspool of feminism and misandry, that it actually serves as a negative influence on the character of women who attend service, as some of the most hateful, vitriolic women I've ever dealt with have come from the church. And it's largely due to the fact that the modern church engages in a lopsided form of accountability. And what I mean is, you rarely see pastors hold women to the same standard of morality as they hold men. We, as men, are routinely called out for the wrong things that we do, while the evil that some women do is largely ignored or downplayed in comparison. So it creates a narrative where women are always saints and men are always sinners. They are always virtuous, while we are wrong and full of evil. And a great example of this is a Mother's Day sermon from Pastor John K. Jenkins. He is the senior pastor of First Baptist Church of Glenarden, a ministry of more than 10,000, possibly closer to 20,000, out of the DC metro area. But his outreach is greater than that. The YouTube channel for the church has more than 850,000 subscribers. My point is, he's not some small-time pastor. He's a prominent voice in the Christian community. But he had some things to say that I take exception to, and we're going to talk about it. So, let's get it. So the sermon in question is titled, God's Direction to Single Mothers. And the purpose of it was to inspire single mothers, specifically single mothers of sons, to remind them that regardless of the circumstances their child was born into, God still loves them, God still cares, and God will still bless them. And for a scriptural reference, he uses the story of Abraham, Hagar, and Ishmael, which starts in Genesis chapter 15 and concludes in chapter 21. Now, for those unfamiliar with the Bible, Abraham was a man of many titles. He's known as the first prophet of God, the father of the faith, the father of many nations, but most importantly, as a friend of God. But before all of that, Abraham was just a guy, living among his people in his father's village, when all of a sudden, God speaks to him saying, "Get away from your country, your people, and your family, because there's some land I want to show you, and in that land I will bless you. I will bless your offspring, and I will make you a great nation." So Abraham does as he's told for the most part. He goes into the land that God told him about, and God did just as he said. He made him a great man, a wealthy man. Abraham was able to amass a huge flock of animals, hundreds of men serving as herdsmen and warriors, as well as women. So he became a powerful tribal leader who defeated 4 kings in battle. So he has just about everything a man could want. However, there's a problem. Abraham doesn't have any children. More importantly, he doesn't have a son, which means he doesn't have an heir. And to complicate matters, his wife Sarah is barren. And by the time that Abraham rises to power, both he and his wife are old. And this is a big issue for Abraham because if he were to die, all of his wealth would go to his chief servant, meaning he would leave the earth without a legacy, that all of the wealth that he had would be transferred to someone else. But God reiterates his promise to Abraham saying, yes, you will have a son, you will be a great nation, and it will be Sarah, at her big barren age, that will bear him that heir. But Abraham and Sarah grow impatient, and Sarah offers Abraham her female servant, a woman named Hagar, and the plan is for Abraham to get her pregnant, giving him the heir he always wanted. And it works. Hagar has a son named Ishmael. But that wasn't God's plan. God promised that Sarah would bear Abraham a son, and later on she did, and his name was Isaac. Now on the surface this seems good. Abraham went from a man who had no children to a man who had 2 sons. So he had his heir and a spare. However, this presents a problem. Ishmael is the eldest son, but his mother was a servant, not a wife, making him a bastard. That's why Isaac is the heir, because his mother was the wife. However, he's the second-born, so both of them have a legitimate claim to Abraham's estate. And for those of you that are fans of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, you know how that complicates things.
Sir Ilan, bring me his head.
This could evolve into a war, and as time passes, things get a bit testy. Ishmael is about 17 or 19 years old, and Isaac is around ages 3 or 5, when Sarah sees Ishmael mocking and making fun of Isaac, and this upsets her, and she goes to Abraham saying, "You've got to get this slave woman and her son out of here, because I don't want her son being an heir with Isaac." Now when Abraham hears this, he doesn't know what to do, because he loves both of his sons equally. So he prays to God, and God responds by telling him to listen to his wife, to listen to Sarah, to send Ishmael and his mother Hagar away. But he also tells Abraham, "Don't worry, I promise to bless you and your seed, and I too will make Ishmael a great nation." And Abraham did as God told him. So he gives Hagar and Ishmael a loaf of bread and a flask of water, and he sends them on their way into the wilderness alone. And when the bread was gone and the flask was empty, the two began to suffer from hunger and dehydration. So Hagar then leads Ishmael to a bush where she sets him down, while she wanders off in the distance to go die, hoping that her son doesn't see her collapse. But Ishmael cries out to God, prompting an angel of God to respond. And the angel says to Hagar, "Fear not, God has heard the voice of the lad, and will make him a great nation." And suddenly, Hagar saw a well of water, saving both of their lives. And from that day forward, God was with Ishmael, and he became the nation that God promised. In fact, many credit him with being the father of the Arab people. So God kept his promise to Abraham, even though Ishmael was the son of a slave woman. And it's from there that Pastor Jenkins begins his sermon.
God's direction for single mothers. I want to talk to single mothers. Where the single mothers at? Stand up. Let me see the single mothers. Wow.
So right off the bat, you see the issue that he's dealing with. Pastor Jenkins asks for all the single mothers to stand up, and about a third of the women in the congregation stand, and those women tithe. So there's a financial incentive to his message.
The statistics in the United States shows that 40% of the children born in this country are born to unwed mothers. If you look at the African American community, that number is a little bit different. It's almost double that. It's almost 80%. Almost 80% of the children born in the African American community are born in a family where the father is not present. That's a horrifying statistic.
Stop right there. What he's doing right there is making a popular claim that isn't true. He's associating out-of-wedlock births with absentee fathers, and that's not an accurate correlation. Shout out to the Medium Man for doing his work on this, but a majority of black fathers, 64%, live with their children. They may not be married to the mothers, but they are in the home. Continuing.
But I want to celebrate the mothers who have been doing this and raising these children, even though they did it all by themselves. I don't want to elevate, though, this as a model. I don't want to think that just say that it's okay. But I do want to take my hat off to the women, in many cases, where the father had disappeared even before the baby was born. I want to celebrate them for not having an abortion. Let's celebrate that point.
Now, I don't like that statement about deadbeat dads either, but we'll address that later. Listen, there are few things worse than terminating a child in the womb, simply for contraceptive reasons. But under no circumstance should we be applauding or passing out consolation trophies for women who chose to keep the baby, because that's what they're supposed to do. Yes, it's better than termination, but what they did is less bad. It's not good.
Some of the single mothers did not get into a single motherhood status because they had become involved in sexual activity and they weren't married. Some of them got in that status because they're divorced, or their spouse died, or they were deserted, or maybe they just had a deadbeat dad who never took the responsibility of taking care of their child.
So twice he takes a dig at fathers. Again, he's operating under another fallacy. He's assuming that these children came from relationships, that the father just up and disappeared after the child was born, when the fact of the matter is, many of these women were never in relationships. It was merely a lust thing, and that doesn't require a relationship. So the fathers didn't disappear, the women never had them. And in many cases, that's intentional. You see, every day there are women who decide to have kids with men they have no intention of being with, or don't properly vet, because they don't want a relationship, they just want the baby.
Why didn't you marry the man you chose to have a child with?
He wasn't good enough for me.
No, I'm not knocking women for being widowed, but it amazes me how he can praise and show mercy to women for choosing to be single mothers, either by casual carnal encounters or divorce, while simultaneously having venom for men guilty of doing the same thing and assuming that they are the only problem. Remember, it takes two.
And then Sarah gives birth to Isaac. So now they're the two boys being raised in this household with the maid, who's the mother of Ishmael. And one day Sarah sees the boys playing, and she sees Ishmael making fun of Isaac. And it's at that time when she says to Abraham that Ishmael and Hagar have got to go. Verse 14, so Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water, putting it on her shoulder. He gave it and the boy to Hagar and sent her away. This is a significant point. I'm a little bothered by Abraham. He's a filthy rich man, but all he gives his son and the baby's mama is a skin of water and some bread. A little troubled by men who don't seem to have the understanding that it takes more than just a couple $100s to raise a child.
Hell! Shut up! Shut up! Shut up!
So now we're 10 minutes into the sermon, and he's trashing men a third time. This time, it's for not paying enough in child support. Keep in mind, he has yet to hold women accountable once so far. But out of all of the absurd things he says, I find this the most frustrating. Because baby mamas are quick to tell you their baby daddy is a deadbeat if he doesn't pay enough in child support. But whenever I hear a woman say that, I ask, did your baby daddy have a job before you decided to lay with him? And was that job enough to support a family? And the answer to one or both of those questions is always no. Because these women aren't picking the best men that society has to offer. They aren't picking doctors, lawyers, entrepreneurs, engineers to be the father of their children. They're picking men with no jobs or low-paying jobs. So whatever a man was before the child was born is who he'll be after the child is born.
Okay, yeah, you got a point.
Because children, and I want to repeat, children don't make men deadbeats. Because children don't choose the father. Women do. Because they are the ones who make men fathers. So instead of chastising men for not paying enough in child support, how about we tell women to stop having children with broke men? Oh. And now that I've gotten the criticism out of the way, there are actually two things he says in this sermon that I agree with.
He tells the mother, he tells Hagar, get up, arise, and lift up the land. This is an important point, because what God is saying to Hagar, stop moping over your circumstance. Stop crying because the baby daddy walked out on you. Stop crying because he don't want you. Stop complaining. Get out of the pity party. Get up, and while you're getting up, don't tear your son down at the same time. Don't tear your child down. Don't tear the child's image of the father down. Get up.
Now that I can applaud, because that's a common issue for some single mothers. But that isn't the only thing he said that I agree with.
Don't get me wrong, I know that fathers are important, and they are important, and we got a push and we got a passion to get men involved in the life of their children. We are working on that. We are making a deal to get the fathers involved in their children. But if your earthly father doesn't show up, your heavenly father will show up to be with you.
Again, I like that too. For all of those who grew up without a dad, look to God for circumstances that are beyond your control. Don't waste your time being angry at your biological father. Focus on your heavenly father. Again, that's something worth applauding. And the reason why I point that out is because there is some good to this sermon, and I don't have an issue with him necessarily encouraging single mothers, specifically those that became that way through no fault of their own, be they widows or women who were forced to conceive children. And that's why I think the Hagar analogy does not work, because Hagar is the latter part of that equation. She didn't choose to be an unwed mother. She was a slave doing as her master ordered. So she didn't have a choice in the matter but to sleep with Abraham and conceive Ishmael. Yet she raised her son. She held on to the promise that God made her, and women like her should be lauded. But to compare her to today's single mothers is ridiculous, specifically when it comes to single mothers who chose deadbeat men to be the fathers of their children. And as for the male bashing, that was absolutely unnecessary. Listen, if you want to big up irresponsible women in your congregation for being single mothers, I don't agree with that, but have at it if you think it helps. But you don't have to put men down to lift them up, or act like women who are in that situation are so through no fault of their own. So even though I disagree with what Pastor Jenkins has said here in this sermon, I don't see him as a villain. I've listened to quite a bit of his messages, and I wouldn't put him in the category of a Jamal Bryant, Keon Henderson, Mike Todd, or Tim Ross. Whenever I hear their names or see them preach, all I hear is,
yes, bitch, yes, yes, bitch, yes, yes, bitch, yes, yes.
And that's not Pastor Jenkins. He's not some sassy heretic or wannabe bad bitch. I think he's a good person and a solid Christian. I just think that the information that he has on men is out of date, and his understanding of how women become single mothers in today's culture is out of touch. I don't think he knows what's going on out there, and I think he should put his ear to the ground before speaking on this issue. But I'm going to let those be my closing thoughts for now. But before I go, please be sure to check out my latest video on Patreon. Laymans Journal Chapter 247. My grandmother was a single mother. Actually, both of my grandmothers were single mothers. But focusing on my maternal grandma, her firstborn child, my aunt, was not my grandfather's daughter. Now, we don't know much about my aunt's father, only that he wasn't around when my aunt was born. And that was common back in the day. Men who sired children and refused to stay at home to help raise them were viewed as the scum of the earth and would often leave town to avoid shame. But it didn't take long for her to meet and marry my grandfather. You see, black men back in the day had no issue becoming stepdads, and that was a tradition that carried on through the boomer and X generations. But this younger generation of men, millennials, zennials, and Gen Zs, are no longer accepting that role for multiple reasons. I repeat, multiple reasons. And one of the main reasons why men of all races are no longer willing to be stepdads is because of the biological father. My grandfather was willing to be my aunt's stepdad because he didn't have to contend with her father, and that was beneficial to my granddad for several reasons. One, it allowed him to be an authoritarian in her life, meaning he didn't have to seek her father's permission in order to be her parent. But most importantly, he didn't have to worry about her dad coming back around, trying to get his family back. He was completely out of the picture, which allowed my grandparents to build a life together. But that tradition is gone now. Not only is the out-of-wedlock birth rate higher in the black community than it was back then, but the social stigma of refusing to help raise a child doesn't exist today as it did back then. Back in the day, a man couldn't show his face if he wasn't there for his kid. Now that dude can walk around without judgment. But more importantly, he still has access to his baby mama, which oftentimes makes things difficult for the new man in her life. Now, I want to be careful discussing this issue because I'm not arguing that a man shouldn't be in his child's life or that a woman should have sole custodial rights, allowing her to alienate the child from the father. What I am saying is, being a stepdad in today's age means having to deal with the child's father. And that's problematic because most single mothers, not all, but a great majority of them are chronic bad decision makers. They choose the worst men, dangerous men to be the father of their children. And as a man seeking a relationship with a single mother, you don't often know what you're getting into. And while I have never seriously pursued a relationship with a single mother, I have many friends and family members who have. And I can tell you plenty of stories about the bad experiences they've had. And it doesn't matter what type of woman you're dealing with. Single mothers of all socioeconomic backgrounds can have crazy baby daddies. But my point is, craziness isn't exclusive to or exempt from a particular social class, and the film In the Bedroom is a prime example of that. It's the story of a young man, a college student, who gets involved with an older single mother of two. That results in fatal consequences. You've just seen a preview of my latest video, which you can watch now in its entirety, uncensored and without obstruction, exclusively on Patreon. Again, that's patreon.com/Laymans Journal. And that's it. That's all I have to say about it. What do you have to say about it? Leave a comment in the comments section and let's have a conversation.
How am I spending my Friday? Some jerk chicken with rice seasoned, red beans and some bread. Got some red wine over here. And I'm watching Layman's Journal on YouTube. Shout out to the brother Layman. Check him out. I'll leave the link in the description. It's your boy Calvin King. And this is how I'm enjoying my Friday.